Andrew, you can officially start the, oh, there we are, it's already started. So, can I welcome all members and officers to the meeting of Council, which, due to government advice to practice social distancing, this meeting will be held virtually. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed following the meeting. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing this meeting from remote locations. Please could everyone ensure that mobile phones are switched off or switched to silent. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. I will ask officers to present a summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point. But I would ask that, with exception of myself, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference and to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. If any members and officers wish to raise a point or question, they should use the instant messaging box icon on the left of the Skype window and simply type speak, and I will come to you in order that I receive those requests. Do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Can I also remind people that because this is being recorded, everything that is typed into the instant messenger box is going to be visible on to the website. And although the instant messenger box may be edited, everything that's typed in there is subject to a Freedom of Information request. So please minimise the use of the box from now on for anything other than attendance, declarations of interest, or to ask for the question. In the event that the Council requires to vote on any item of business before it at the meeting, I will announce that the members of the Council have 20 seconds to vote by typing for, against, or abstain in the instant messenger icon. I will then ask Democratic Services to announce the decision made by the committee. In the event that the recorded vote is requested at Council, I will ask the members to switch on their microphones, and then the Democratic Services Officer will conduct a roll call of each member, asking whether they are for, against, or abstain from the recommendation in a report before announcing the outcome of the decision. Officers from Democratic Services and ICT will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary, will mute those not being used. Before we formally commence, I will now ask the officer from Democratic Services. We were going to ask the Democratic Services to announce the names of the councillors in attendance at the meeting. However, that would take such a long time. What we're going to do is we are going to announce those that aren't at the meeting, and then we'll move on from there. You all know how to use your arrows over your little blue boxes at the bottom. That will show you everybody that will be in the meeting. We'll now go through the agenda then. Item 1, apologies for absence. Do I have any apologies for absence? Can you please indicate in the instant messenger box, please? I will take silence as the fact that there isn't anybody coming forward.
Mr. Mayor, I have apologies from Councillor Tilsley.
Thank you, Andrew. I don't see any others. So we'll go on to agenda item number 2. Declarations of interest. Do we have to receive declarations of personal and prejudicial interest from members and officers in accordance with the provision of the Members' Code of Conduct adopted by Council from the 1st of September 2008. If you have any declarations, please indicate in the instant messenger box, please. Nothing? Okay. Agenda item number 3. To receive the approval of the minutes of meeting Council held on the 26th of February 2002 and 2020 and 11th of March 2020. Can I have a mover, please?
Move.
Second.
Thank you. Andrew, did you get who those were? Perhaps I could ask for movers and seconders into the instant messenger box, please.
Gary.
Deputy Leader.
Right, thank you. Okay, item 4. I hope that you and your families have been keeping safe and well in these unprecedented times. I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank all the staff of BCBC who have truly stepped up to the challenges presented to them over the last 4 months. Staff across all departments have worked extremely hard to ensure that our services have continued to run smoothly and successfully for our residents. They have adapted very quickly to new and different working environments and brought innovation to areas where a rapid response was necessary. Staff have worked over and above the period, while also facing their own personal challenges brought on by the pandemic. Their dedication and hard work is admirable. As Mayor, I have also had to adapt to a new way of working. I have attended some engagements via Skype and will continue to do so. I was also honoured to provide a video message on behalf of BCBC to mark VE Day and to commemorate the victims of the genocide in Srebrenica. Despite the current situation, I feel it is important to continue to mark our important events and remember the people affected. I also have some sad news to impart. Some of you may be aware that the former Mayor, Reg Jenkins, unfortunately passed away a few weeks ago. Reg served as a member of the council for 2 terms before stepping down to enjoy retirement in 2017. Reg was not only a very active ward member for Pontycymer, but also infamous for his annual stint as Santa, and there was no false beard required for all of you that knew Reg. Over the years, Reg donned his red suit to raise thousands of pounds for local charities. So, on behalf of this council, I would like to extend our condolences to his wife, Teresa. Thank you very much. We will now move on to agenda item number 5 to receive the announcements of the leader. Councillor Hugh David, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm conscious that we have a very full agenda today, but there are several issues that I would like to ensure members are aware of so they're able to advise your constituents in the event of an approach. Firstly, we are aiming to have all 110 council-maintained children's play areas reopened by the 30th of July. I'm aware that some questions have been asked on social media about why the sites could not just open immediately as soon as the Welsh Government made their announcement. The reason for this is that each site has to be properly risk assessed and inspected to make sure they are safe to use, that the play equipment is not damaged or vandalised, and that we are able to take all necessary precautions to limit the potential for exposure to the coronavirus. To accommodate this, new signage has to be introduced to advise people about requirements on social distancing, the use of hand sanitisers in the play area, and more. Signage is being manufactured as we speak and will be installed as part of a rolling programme of work. We anticipate that it will take another 5 days before the first set of play areas are ready. These sites will include Griffin Park in Porthcawl, Maesteg Welfare Park, Newbridge Fields in Bridgend, Pencoed Recreation Ground, Victoria Street in Pontycymer, Wyntoed in Nantymoel, and the play area adjacent to an Ysawdra swimming pool. All other remaining play areas will be reopened by 30th of July at the latest. Our number one priority throughout this process remains the safety and well-being of children, and we are asking residents to bear with us while we ensure that the sites are safe to use. The annual electoral canvass is underway once more, and the Council is encouraging as many eligible householders as possible to complete their registrations online as part of efforts to limit the spread of coronavirus. Following national and local data matching, more than 54,400 properties will be told that no response is necessary unless they need to confirm changes to the details held by this council. A further 10,684 properties are being targeted to elicit a response. If no such response is forthcoming, a canvasser will be dispatched to carry out a personal visit to the property. In the event they are also unsuccessful, they will leave a form and a prepaid envelope at the address for the householder to return. Following the bill passed by members of the Senedd in November last year, teenagers aged 14 and 15 years of age can now register as pre-attainers so they can vote at the age of 16. I hope that members will encourage local residents to complete the canvass wherever necessary. The electoral pages of the council website contain more details about how they can do this. Throughout the pandemic, the council has undertaken a range of initiatives designed to help local sports clubs. This includes setting up the Bridgend Sports Support Fund to provide clubs with grants of up to £1,000, a recent decision to waive fees for the 2019-20 season, and ongoing support for clubs that are already developing community asset transfers. Now, more support has been made available through the Sports Wales Be Active Wales Fund. This is enabling clubs to apply for grants for between £300 and £50,000 to help pay for utilities, insurance and other fixed costs that may be in place for facility or equipment hire. It can also help clubs make adaptations to ensure that activities are safe, such as introducing one-way systems, providing hand sanitizers and online booking platforms, or installing health and safety signage. If members are aware of any local clubs within their communities who may benefit from this, full details are available at the Sports Wales website, and we'd encourage sports clubs to take full advantage of the funding opportunities available. I also want to let constituents know that with the pandemic still in effect, a range of financial support is available for anyone who's facing difficulty paying their council tax. The council recently issued more than 6,000 letters to advise residents of outstanding balances on their accounts. This is a particularly challenging and uncertain time, and the council has sought to work with residents wherever possible. A range of options are available, including reductions, discounts and deferrals, and I hope members will encourage anyone who may be experiencing issues to contact the authority so that we can help them find a way forward. Finally, I wanted to formally and publicly thank once again, I did it yesterday in Cabinet, but this is her last full council meeting, our retiring Director of Social Services and Wellbeing. I want to thank her for her distinguished record as a leader of such an important profession to this authority and to Wales. A profession that I know she was so proud to be part of all her working life. Sue has been very passionate about the support and the support we want to provide and continue to provide to the most vulnerable citizens of our borough. And she's been determined to ensure that at the heart of all the decisions that we have made. That drive and belief was there from the first day that she started working for Argo Borough Council, and it will be there on the last day that she works for Bridgend County Borough Council. She started, Sue, on the front line, and that dedication to the citizens, the dedication to the communities of Bridgend has been demonstrated time and time again, not least by her recent decision, just as the pandemic was having such a devastating impact in Bridgend. Sue was due to retire, but made the decision to defer her retirement because of her commitment. So Sue should be, I don't know whether she should be in Italy or Spain at the moment. That was the original plans, but Sue changed those plans because she wanted to lead our authorities' response to the emergency in our social services, and what an outstanding job she's done. So a big thank you to Sue. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. And if Sue was due to be in Italy, then grazie mille per oggi e buona fortuna. I'm going to bring in Councillor Phil White now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is not how the way that we wanted to plan this out for Sue to retire after all the dedication that she's given Bridgend. But we are in the times that we are in. If I could say, Mr. Mayor, Sue, when you first informed me back about 6 months ago now that you were going to actually retire, it was hard to take in. I know that we had talked about it for some time and you were thinking of doing it, but even when you said it, it was still a lot to take in. As the leader just said, you had planned to retire in March, but a little crisis of COVID-19 intervened, and you being Sue didn't need to be asked. You volunteered yourself up as you would have, and something not that we would have expected, but we knew would come from you without even asking. As you know, I've always told you have been, in my eyes, the best director of social services we've had in Wales. Your dedication, determination to get things done and to get them done safely has always been a superb trait of yours. Besides doing it all with compassion, may I add, and compassion being with a large capital C. I've been so proud to have been a colleague and a friend of yours. And can I just say to you personally, on many occasions, I've had the opportunity of speaking with others in your position throughout the other local authorities, and how many of them have admired and respected you, and how many of them have said that you've been a true professional and a role model for others. You have been inspirational over the last 5 years, taking the director through a transformation and remodelling programme of the service. This being done, may I add, alongside us merging into a new health region. That you've done, and that how you led that transition for Bridgend to great success. I always remember you telling me, Phil, I've just been in a meeting with the health board, and I was the only one there present from Bridgend, and there were at least 22 others from the health board. But that only just tells me, Sue, that they needed 20 or 22 to actually match you, Sue Cooper, representing Bridgend. You always say that you were a piece of rock, and I've always heard you say that, and if you was through the middle, you'd have Bridgend written all through you. You have reached the pinnacle of your career. You're right in the Director of Social Services, and you have reached that with great strides throughout sheer hard work. I am going to miss you. I've said we'll never replace Sue with another Sue Cooper, but with someone else, I hope, with equal determination and deliberation. You have made our social services a better place, and something to be proud of, and something that is fit for purpose for the 21st century. Our directorate is better for it, this authority is better for it, and the people and residents of Bridgend are better for your contribution and your compassion for doing things right for social care in Bridgend and for Wales. I wish you a long and healthy retirement, and for you to have that precious time with your mother in her twilight years, and something you have been looking forward to for some time. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Nora Clark has indicated she'd like to speak as well, please. Would you like to come in now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I would reiterate everything that my other colleagues have said. Sue, obviously we're going to miss you greatly. I'd like to thank you very much for how you've carried out in the professional way that you have your job. And thank you very, very much for what you've done for the residents of the County Borough of Bridgend, and especially our most vulnerable residents. And I wish you a happy and long retirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Yes, of course, Sue, would you like to come in now?
Well, I'm going to try. I'm glad had my camera off, actually. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments. I'm a little bit overwhelmed. It was Australia I was going to, actually. I'm not sure whether they'll ever let me in now. hopefully in a couple of years I'll be able to go and visit. Thank you very much for the comments you've made. It's really quite hard to say goodbye remotely, actually. It's you know, I'm very much a people person. It would be, you know, I would have preferred to have been able to see everyone, but we are where we are, and it's been a tough few months, and I think Bridgend has come through it really, really well, and it's been a privilege to work alongside everybody during the last few months. I just want to thank everyone for the support I've had over very many years. I have actually been here 36 years. I was only 15 when I started. I was really young. But thank you for all the support I've had. I particularly want to thank you, Leader. I've really enjoyed working with you, and the same to Councillor White as my Cabinet member. Have really enjoyed the working relationship, and I just want to also give a mention to the former Leader, Mel Knott, and to my previous Cabinet member, who of course is no longer with us, in Morgan. It's been hard at times. At times it's been really challenging. At times it's been emotional, but it's always been so rewarding. And I've had a bit of a mantra, really, which is to treat other people as I would want to be treated myself. And I think that's held me in good stead. And to be able to have made a contribution, albeit a small part, in supporting and improving the lives of people, and those people who are most vulnerable. It's been an absolute privilege to do that, and very humbling. And I've also enjoyed the laughs. There's been a few laughs. And Andrew, you're going to have to wipe this off the recording now. But thank you for the singing in Bournemouth. Thank you very much for all those packed lunches you managed to get into the back of the car when we were driving back from Llandudno. And I won't say anything about the complimentary umbrella, but thank you very much. And I think laughter just helps so much, doesn't it? And really lifts and helps keep everything very positive. I've been very proud. I am very proud of my profession, and I'm very proud to be a social worker. And I've been very proud to work for Bridgend Council. And I think Bridgend Council is very special. And I talk to people right across Wales, and there are so many people who look in, and I think Bridgend has got a really good reputation. And I think the relationships we have are very, very strong. So I think Bridgend is very, very special. So I'm going to miss everybody and everything very, very much. But thank you very much for all your good wishes. Thank you.
Well done, Sue.
Well done, Sue.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sue. And I'm sure that the applause comes from everybody within the chamber for the work that you've put in over the years. Whenever there's something or a challenge that needs to be done, you're at the front of it, leading the way. And I'm sure everybody in the chamber respects the work that you've put in over the years. So thank you very much. We will now move on to agenda item number 6, the report from the Chief Executive and the update on County Borough Council's response to COVID-19. Please, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With your permission, what I'm going to do in a moment is put up a presentation for people to see, and hopefully then go through that and, of course, answer any questions at the end, if that's okay with you. Let's just see if I can make this work.
It does take a little time sometimes to come on up, but it will appear.
Apologies. Can everyone now see that?
Not yet, no. Now it's up, Mark.
Yes? Ready to go?
Yeah, so if obviously this response is going to be going through now, because there is an additional graphic that's going on, it's going to take up more space and everything. So can everybody please make sure, except Mark, that their microphones are off, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And of course, what I should say as well, I will of course circulate the presentation after council to all members so that everyone has what's been presented. Just as a starting point, of course, this is the first virtual council since lockdown. So of course it'd be odd, having spent 4 months lockdown, if I didn't spend some time talking about the council's response to COVID-19. It has, of course, led to a very different way of the council doing business. We've had to adapt significantly. And I'm very aware that for some members, this is probably the first opportunity to engage fully in a debate about the council's response to COVID-19, though there have been previous conversations at both cabinet and at corporate scrutiny. So this is an opportunity really for me to update, though inevitably in the time available, it is a brief run through the key issues and challenges, but perhaps more importantly, it's also an opportunity for members to ask questions at the end of the presentation. I think we're all familiar with the characteristics and consequences of the lockdown across the country. I won't read through it, but we know that they've been unique, they've been severe, they've been unprecedented, and of course that's no different in terms of the issues for the council, and it's required a rapid emergency crisis response with no time for the usual planning, the usual business as usual. So it has been quite a unique few months, and as Sue's just said, at times it's been very challenging as well. In terms of the council's response, well, I think the first thing to say is that certainly in those initial phases, it was almost a breakneck speed. You'll recall that there were government announcements most evenings, and then we'd find ourselves burning the midnight oil to respond to those very quickly in terms of what they might mean for us the next day. And so there was often an urgent response required to changing circumstances, to guidance and to regulation. And that also meant that at times new services were created, and of course others stopped if they were deemed less of a priority. Many staff were redeployed, and of course the majority worked from home. I think we distributed over 1,500 laptops very, very quickly, recognising that we needed to do that in order for business to carry on in the way that the public would expect. Importantly, no one directly employed by the council was furloughed, though I think that did happen in some of our partners. And our focus throughout this period has been on the delivery of essential services, in particular for the most vulnerable in our communities, and seeking to prevent the spread of the virus to save lives. Again, a hugely important role that all local authorities have played over that 4-month period. I've mentioned the service adaptation at a scale and pace that's been unprecedented. Also, of course, what that's meant is that we've had to put emergency governance arrangements in place. For us, that has meant that we've had initially daily meetings of Cabinet and CMB, and the leader and myself have had emergency powers to make decisions in an unusual way. But what we have tried to do is also have regular meetings with group leaders, at least once a week. I know the leader has spoken on a nightly basis to the leader of the opposition, and we have increased considerably our comms throughout this period to try and keep everyone as informed as best we can. And I think one of the characteristics I'd just like to draw attention to, which I think has been really important during this period, is this real sense of a one council approach, not just across the officers, but actually across all political parties and all members and all of our partners outside of the organisation as well. That enhanced partnership working has been really crucial in terms of our response. I've put a quick infographic up as the next slide. You may not be able to read it, but I think it's interesting really just in terms of the scale of our response over this period. We've had over 44,000 calls to customer services, a social media reach of over 6 million hits. We've distributed almost £30 million worth of support grants from government grants that we've had to administer. We've engaged with over 1,500 key workers' children in our emergency childcare settings to allow their parents to carry on working. We've had over 1,500 volunteers register, and over 1,000 individuals have been supported at home, including, of course, shielded individuals and our most vulnerable, including the delivery of food parcels. I mean, that doesn't do justice to it all because, of course, some of the services that we run are very frontline, others are back office. But I think it's illustrative, really, of the extent to which we've had to be responsive over the period in question. I think moving on, I think it's important I do cover the extent of the virus in Bridgend. So some headline figures for you here. The number of cases, positive cases in Bridgend as of July the 19th was 568 out of the 16,806 in Wales. The next line down is important because the number of cases per 100,000 population in Bridgend is about 386 and the Wales average is 533. But by way of comparison, the figures in RCT and Merthyr in the rest of the Cwm Taf region are much, much higher. They're over 700 in RCT and over 800 in Merthyr. So in many respects, the prevalence of the virus in Bridgend has been much lower. And you'll note that in the last 7 days, the number of new cases in Bridgend is down as low as 3 as the virus has slowed. So, of course, that's very important. Moving on to deaths in Bridgend, I think the first thing to say here is that, of course, every single death is absolutely tragic for the individuals, their families, and their friends. But again, on a comparative basis, there have been 92 COVID-19 deaths in Bridgend for the period from the 20th March to the 19th of July, and only 1 death in the latest week, and that's out of a total of 2,470 deaths across Wales. So again, on a relative basis, that has been contained within the Bridgend County Borough area. I recognise on the next slide you may not be able to see it properly, but you will, of course, when I send it out, you'll see the detail. What this next slide does is just show you really the peaks in terms of deaths in Bridgend. You'll see that the peak was the week beginning the 10th of April, continued at a relatively high rate through the rest of April and early May, and again you can see latterly over the last couple of months how that has fallen considerably. And what that slide also does is show you where those deaths took place, whether that's in care homes, hospitals, home, or other. And so again, I think it's a useful background slide for people for information. I think where we are now is obviously with a gradual easing of lockdown. Again, without necessarily reading everything out, as it's been safe to do so, various services have restarted, if not in whole, but in part. And we can begin to recognise, I think, that will accelerate and gather pace, even more so over the next coming weeks and months. I think the important thing to stress here, though, it's just not a case of reopening things. In almost every case that is listed here, what it requires is a new way of looking at things, a new way of doing business, which involves risk assessment, social distancing, new cleanliness and hygiene regimes, and a whole different way of operating to ensure that we can safely reopen services. But I think you'll see gradually that things are reopening, perhaps getting back to more that we would regard as normal, and as I say, potentially we'll have more of that in the following weeks. We do, however, have a number of very, very significant ongoing challenges. During the period of lockdown, we provided an enhanced service for homeless individuals to ensure that people were not left out on the street. There is now a Welsh Government expectation that is continued, certainly to some degree, moving forward, which of course is the right thing to do, but it's a very challenging thing, potentially a very expensive thing. We know that our support for local business is going to be absolutely crucial moving forward. We know that potentially we're on the threshold of a deep and lengthy recession. We anticipate that unemployment and benefit claimants will increase significantly in the county borough, and we need to do our best to support local businesses in every way we can. The delivery of the Test, Trace and Protect project, which monitors and assesses positive cases and traces the people that they've been in touch with, is of course crucial to that gradual easing of lockdown that I talked about. Again, the number of cases in Bridgend have been relatively low, but we do know that we need a really efficient TTP project in order to manage the ongoing easement of lockdown, and potentially, should it be necessary, to implement local lockdowns should there be a second spike at any point. We are very, very aware of the support required for staff well-being and a gradual return to the office environment. There are many things that have worked well during the lockdown, and some people have welcomed the agile working, working from home. But we also know, depending on circumstances, that for others it's been a real challenge, and for many they are potentially concerned about a return to an office environment. So an awful lot of effort has been put into providing the necessary support for all staff and through their trade unions as well, to feel that they're well supported and can have the necessary support to make them feel better about returning to work when that comes about. I put a bullet point in there about nurturing and embracing some of the positive new ways of working. And you heard a lot of people say that there's going to be a new normal, not necessarily a phrase I like, but I can't think of a better one. But I do think it's important that we do nurture and embrace some of the things that work really well, and we don't seek to return to everything being the way it was before lockdown in early March. I do think that's important moving forward. We also have some immediate challenges, the continued delivery of summer free school meals being one, the continued support for shielded individuals at least until August the 16th and possibly beyond that in some cases. And as I just mentioned in passing, importantly, the preparation for the organisation's response to a second wave or spike of the virus, and making sure that where there are lessons learned, that we implement those. And no one, of course, knows whether there will be a second wave or when that will be. But people have spoken that could be as early as the autumn, and therefore it's important that that piece of work is carried out swiftly and efficiently. If I move on to some of the financial challenges, and I do think it's just worth dwelling for a few slides on this, because they really are very significant as far as the organisation is concerned, and they come about in a range of ways. First of all, in terms of additional cost pressures. So, for example, there's some things that when the budget was agreed back in February, we wouldn't have probably even thought of. But we now know that we need to spend many hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, for example, on things like PPE. So there's a significant additional cost pressure in some services. We also know that there's large amounts of lost income. So obviously in areas like car parking, in school meals, planning fees, and where the council is a landlord, in rental income as well. So we know there's large amounts of lost income. We also know that some of the MTFS savings that were agreed back in February will probably no longer be able to be made, certainly not in full, maybe in part, but certainly not in full. So, for example, where staff restructures were proposed that were intended to be implemented in the early part of this financial year, for obvious reasons, they haven't been progressed in some cases, and so we may find that some of the agreed MTFS savings cannot be made in full. There are, of course, to offset that, some marginal and anticipated savings where some services have stopped, or some savings have come about from, for example, not using the offices as much. And so any overall additional costs, of course, have to be offset by where those savings exist. And then the last bullet point there is about the council tax, and just a recognition, really, that there's likely to be a shortfall in council tax collection, and also potentially an increase in the amount of council tax benefits, again, both of which will have an impact on our overall finances. Welsh Government, of course, and UK Government have produced a range of additional financial support. Obviously, it's in our interest to make sure that the opportunities to claim and to bid against these as much as possible are taken, and of course, therefore, we're doing that. But it's important to recognise that at this stage, it's unknown how much of what we've claimed and how much we bid for we'll get and how much will be recoverable. And so there are likely to be some areas where we'll not be able to claim the money back, and then again, that will become a financial burden for the council. At this stage, I think it's fair to say Welsh Government have been very supportive of the claims we put in so far. We've put in a claim at just under 3 million. We've been paid just over 2 million. But you'll note already there's about £600,000 worth of claim that's been disallowed. And again, if I just highlight some of the issues that we're concerned about. So only 50% of our additional ICT costs have been deemed allowable. So we have to find the other 50%. And we do know that, for example, in our leisure services and our partnership with Halo, we know that there will be a significant financial challenge for Halo for a long period. And again, at this stage, that is not something being supported by Welsh Government, those longer term cost implications. So I think it's just worth, on one of my last financial slides, just showing you how that impacts on our Q1 projections. So on this slide, what it demonstrates is that we have a net overspend of 3,842,000 forecast at this stage, which of course is very, very significant, with very, very significant overspends in each directorate for the reasons that I've set out already. So you can see that the scale of the financial challenge is huge for all local authorities. I think Leader mentioned in his announcements that the financial challenges also, of course, exist to our residents, and of course we recognise that. So in terms of council tax, we've been doing as much as we can to support people in terms of deferring council tax payments the latter part of the year, or spreading the council tax over 12 instead of 12 months, and only undertaking soft reminders and limited recovery. But of course there is an impact of that, and it's just worth pointing out there that a 1% reduction in our council tax collection results in a loss of income of approximately 1 million. So of course, if that is not contained, again, it has a very significant impact. And similarly, on the council tax reduction scheme below, again, we anticipate that that will increase, as I said earlier. At the moment, it looks as if it's about £300,000, but again, we feel by the end of the financial year, that could be an additional cost of between £500,000 and £1 million for financial year. So in summary, we've got some really, really significant financial challenges. And of course, at this stage also, unknown MTFS settlements for next year. Of course, we hope that they are favourable based on the challenges we face, but there's no guarantee of that. So it could be a very, very challenging year financially. If I then move to the Council's plan to recover from COVID-19, you will know that I reported to Cabinet on June the 30th with a very detailed report talking about the Council's planning framework. And as part of that report, Cabinet recommended that the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which then met on July the 13th, established a cross-party recovery panel which would help shape and inform recommendations to Cabinet as part of our recovery. One of the things we anticipate is that of course, we set the budget and we set the corporate plan in February, pre-COVID, and we anticipate that we'll have to reset the budget and the corporate plan probably in September, taking account of those changed circumstances and revised priorities. So I've already illustrated there were many things that we didn't know about at that point, but as well there will be many things that were perfectly sensible priorities back in February, but perhaps now we might let slip because there are other things that are of greater concern and greater priority at this stage. The fourth bullet point down there as well, we also propose to establish a recovery fund to be established for one-off investment priorities this financial year. Now again, you'll see that this is a delicate balancing act. So on the one hand, I'm talking to you about the severe financial challenges. On the other hand, we do feel the Council has a really important role in helping boost and kick-starting some of the recovery that will be required. So for example, from that fund, we're already offering free car parking as things stand. We're offering at the moment free rentals, where we're the landlord, for example, in the markets, in Maesteg and in Bridgend, and on industrial estates. And of course, there may be other things where Cabinet feel that it's important that we invest in certain things to give that boost to the economy and promote and accelerate that recovery. It's difficult to put exact timelines on each phase of restart, recover and renew, but because I get asked, I've tried to do so. I mean, I think restart is immediate. I've already given you some examples of where some of our services have restarted, and I think that will continue to be the case potentially up to the next 6 months. I think the recovery period is probably 12 months, but possibly 18 months, taking us through to the end of the 2021 21 to 22 financial year. I think inevitably the recovery will take that long. But I do also think that the renewal phase is really important as well. So again, as I illustrated earlier, we're not necessarily seeking to put everything back as it was pre-COVID. I think what we need to do is have a very good look at the Council's operating model moving forward and come up with something that's fit for purpose for perhaps the next 5 years or so. I've identified what I believe to be the recovery priorities. Of course, I totally recognise that you may have others, and indeed the recovery panel may come up with others. These are not in priority order, but I think it's just worth me going through them again to recognise the scale of the challenge that we face. In the first instance, we know that we want to reopen schools to all pupils in September, but of course we also know that we need to do that safely and with the confidence of our teachers, our parents, our trade unions and our pupils. So that is a very significant challenge being led by Lindsay and his team. I've talked about the economic crisis. So again, the Cabinet report on June the 30th established or approved, sorry, a local economic recovery plan and the establishment of a local task force, which will be made up of representatives as well from throughout business and throughout industry in the local area. And again, no doubt they will have recommendations of things that we should do to aid that recovery. I briefly mentioned in passing the future sustainability of culture and leisure venues. This is a real challenge. If you take something like our theatres, the prospect of theatres being able to open anytime soon is quite remote. That obviously provides a real challenge to the likes of Awan and also similarly, as I mentioned earlier, for Halo in terms of when they would properly be able to open some of their venues, in particular things like their swimming pools and their changing rooms. So, well, you know, it's in our interest to keep our partnership with those organisations going, but that's a real stretch for us. It's something we're working very hard on. I think there's also some opportunities in our recovery priorities. We've seen throughout the country some authorities taking that opportunity to create safer streets, increasing pedestrianisation, looking at active travel as a priority, and also resetting public transport and recognising that that may play an increasing role as well moving forward. So I think that's something that's in our priority list. I've already mentioned the homelessness provision and how do we provide long-term sustainable solutions for our homeless population in the county borough, and that continuing support for the most vulnerable, particularly around care and social care, would be important. But I think the point I've added at the latter end of that bullet point is that we've grown a really strong relationship with the third sector and with BARVO in particular during lockdown, and for me it's really important that's nurtured moving forward, because it may change the way in which we can deliver some of our care, and it may also enhance community resilience, and I think it's a really important point. Moving on to the remaining recovery priorities, clearly, as I said, these weren't in priority. Stopping the spread and return of the virus is probably, if they were in priority order, of course, is still one of the main ones. We know that we have to operate differently. We know that we have to prepare differently for a potential second wave or spike. So, for example, that stockpile of PPE is something that we're proactively addressing to make sure that we are better placed should there be a further lockdown moving forward. The continued reopening of other council services. I know some members have contacted me about the council offices. I think we're taking a proportionate and sensible approach to the reopening of council offices. It will be done on a gradual basis. It is a real challenge. I'm told that because, for example, the civic offices is predominantly open plan with bench desks, that it's likely initially we'll only be able to operate at maybe up to 25 to 33% capacity. That requires, therefore, that we have systems in place to manage the numbers within the civic offices, and it might require rota arrangements and a sort of hybrid arrangement where we allow people to work sometime at home but also come into the office as and when necessary. So big bits of work ongoing around that. And finally, again, perhaps both risk and opportunity around digital services. One of the things that's happened during lockdown is that in many respects we've been able to do some things much more quickly than we ordinarily would have done. So, for example, I mentioned the 1,500 laptops rolled out very quickly. Well, similarly, people have adapted very quickly to the vast majority of our services being available on a digital basis. I think if we'd asked that question, it might have had to be done much more slowly with pilots. But I think having got to a point where a lot of the public are used to doing things digitally, we wouldn't want to lose that. But at the same time, recognising that we will have to provide alternatives for some services, and also recognising some of the enhanced risks around things such as cyber fraud. But there are also some opportunities in our recovery as well. One of the things I'm really keen on is that the response to recovery is coordinated. So the PSB have indicated their wish to very rapidly carry out a community impact assessment based on COVID-19. Therefore, there's no point us duplicating that and doing one as well. And I think that will feed into our recovery planning and be a very important piece of work. Similarly, I've already mentioned the local economic task force and the need for that to also shape and inform our recovery priorities and recommendations, and also Audit Wales, who I know did speak briefly to our scrutiny officers today about, last week, about becoming involved in our cross-party recovery panel, are very keen on us looking with them at fit for the future as well, about how do we make our services sustainable and fit for the future, and don't miss some of the opportunities that have emerged from a crisis, if you like. So for me, it's about avoiding duplication and making swift and meaningful recommendations based on a sound evidence base. So moving to the last couple of slides, I think there have been some positive changes which we do need to ensure that they endure moving forward. And the challenge is, I suppose, not allowing things to revert back to what the old normal was too quickly, and that's, you know, that's not, it's almost inadvertent at times. So there's some very quick and rapid and important pieces of work going on about how we can embrace some of the positive change that's gone on and change the way the council does business on a more permanent basis. However, to do that, then you'll clearly have to bring the staff, the trade unions, the public, you as elected members, and everyone else with us as best we can. And so the views of people are very important to help and shape and inform the council's recovery plan, and we've already started that process. We've had a number, well, hundreds of responses actually from staff in terms of the kind of things that they'd like to see embraced moving forward, and some very good ideas among them. But again, a really significant piece of work, because again, what it might require is that we have a complete review of a lot of the council's policies and staff policies. So all of these things take resource and take time and take effort, and so it's important that we prioritise the things that are most important to us first. There will, I think, be further opportunities for investment from ongoing grants from Welsh Government and also capital initiatives. I think there's a strong view amongst many politicians, including I think the leader, that a sort of, if you like, building and spending our way out of some of this crisis would be incredibly helpful in terms of some of the council's infrastructure, whether that's schools, whether that's roads, whether that's flooding, whether that's energy projects. So again, we're trying to encourage and trying to influence that big programmes which would allow council to spend on those important matters would be really important. I make a really important point here about staff well-being again. If there were, for example, a second peak as early as October, I think we genuinely need to be really, really aware of burnout. A nod here to my colleagues. Again, in the Mayor's introduction, he mentioned the sterling work of staff, and so we know there's been some incredible work ongoing on the front line, but also in back office services, and I wouldn't normally do this, but also a nod to my colleagues on the senior management teams. I know many have worked incredibly hard for a 4-month period with barely a day off. Now again, of course people do that in a crisis, but if it went and sort of fed into immediately another crisis, that would of course be difficult to sustain. So I think it's also important that people, where they can, ideally take some time off during August and hopefully refresh and re-energise in readiness for whatever may come moving forward. Last couple of points. I think this green recovery opportunity is something that I think interests me. I think it's Welsh Government's priority. So rather than just ploughing money into, willy-nilly into things, they're very keen that we embrace obviously the Wellbeing of the Future Generations Act and the green recovery opportunities in particular. So there's some deep thinking going on about what our priorities may be around that. And I make the point again that I don't think things are going to return to pre-March 2020. So there's something about our mindsets really, about getting our heads around all of that. So finally, in conclusion, obviously a uniquely challenging 4-month period, certainly not one I've experienced before in 30 years in local government, and I'd suggest unlikely to experience again. Unprecedented change, but perhaps more importantly, the breakneck speed of it has been perhaps its major characteristic.
I think the council's response has largely been excellent. We've had a lot of positive feedback, which of course I've been delighted about, particularly about the way in which that one council approach has been embraced. And I think it's fair to say that some of the staff response, I don't think it's too strong a word, has genuinely been heroic. And some of the stories that I've heard have been, incredibly pleasing about the way people have responded. Again, just to recognise that some of the change is probably forever, so let's not try and hark back to everything being as it was before. But we do need to recognise as well, we need to be realistic that the economic hit is likely to be severe, with increased unemployment and benefit claimants, and it's going to be tough. Frankly, it's going to be tough, I think, for a couple of years, and we need to recognise that. But that just, for me, makes the council role even more important in terms of recovery and renewal. And I think we all have a role, including every elected member, in terms of community leadership, and to lead and support and enhance community resilience, particularly for the most vulnerable in our communities. And so we know what our priorities are. I set them out earlier. We know we've got a really challenging period coming up, but all in all, I hope that's a useful summary, Mr. Mayor, which takes me, I think, to the recommendations in the report, which is that the report is noted, and the presentation is noted, that the approach approved by Cabinet to respond to COVID-19 around Restart, Recover and Renewed is noted, and also to note the establishment of the cross-party recovery panel to help shape and inform and advise Cabinet on the Council's recovery planning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. And like I said, I'm sure other members within the chamber would like to thank staff, but I'll do it on their behalf for all the work, otherwise we will be here all day. I do have two questions that have been indicated, Councillor Altaf Hussain and Councillor Tim Thomas, but they did indicate quite early on in your presentation. So I'm just wondering, do you still have that question, or has Mark answered that question throughout the rest of his presentation? So I'll come to Councillor Altaf Hussain first, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll just quickly ask that question. Thank you very much, Mark, it's a great presentation, and I enjoyed it. I also enjoy your emails from time to time. I am very grateful to our leader for his updates and his quick action. Now, my question is, how confident are you about the ability of our local and health authority to manage patients' demand if there is a second peak of COVID-19, knowing that our health authority looks after Rhondda and Merthyr Tydfil as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Yeah, I would say that of course it'll be challenging, but I think Sharon Hopkins, the Chief Executive of the Health Board, would say that we are better prepared for a second peak than of course we were first time round. We know more about the virus, we know more about the way it spreads, we know more about our response, and we're better prepared in terms of that response. I mentioned earlier PPE, and of course at this stage we've kept all the Nightingale hospitals as well, so that should there be pressure on the NHS and on the hospitals in particular, we do have that additional bed space. So I don't think in any way we can be complacent, and we are, I think, fortunate. The extent of the infection in Bridgend has been less, as you say, than in RCT and Merthyr, but I think the general view is that we're better prepared. I think something perhaps I should have mentioned in my presentation is that we continue to have a weekly meeting with the Chair and Chief Executive of the Health Board. I think that working relationship with them, again, is something that's improved rapidly during the crisis, and we are working well together as a team, as I know Sue is as well, as Director of Social Services with them as well. So I don't think in any way we could be complacent, because I suppose the answer to your question is it depends on the scale of any second peak, because it could of course be overwhelming. But generally I think we're confident that we are in a reasonable place to respond to what we anticipate may come in the latter months of this calendar year, which of course may be more difficult as well, because it may be combined with the usual seasonal flu and other things as well, which will put pressure on our health service.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Just before we thank you, Altaf. Before we move on to that, can I have a mover and a seconder for Mark's report, please? You can indicate in the instant messenger box, please.
No to report.
Thank you.
No.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I'll now go on to Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mark. Firstly, I just wanted to thank all of our key workers who have worked diligently and heroically, as Mark has said, in protecting our vulnerable and restoring our local economy as much as they can. I've also got to say as well, from my referrals, I've seen no deterioration in the quality and timeliness of responses as well. So I wanted to thank all council workers across the council. Just a quick point, if I may, on the cross-party recovery group. I warmly support it, and I also warmly support pretty much everything that Mark said in his presentation. I just must stress, however, that such a group, I think, given that policy developments are fast-moving and embryonic, I just hope that such a cross-party group will be flexible.
Tim, can I just throw you, obviously this seems a little bit more of a statement. What is your question you're asking of Mark, please?
All right, okay. Will the group be flexible, and will it be will members' attendance be considered as well as a formal group, and will it be webcast as well? So it's in order to be transparent to all stakeholders who'll be interested.
Thank you, Tom. Tim.
Perhaps, Mr. Mayor, if I kick off answering, and maybe Kelly wants to come in on some of the practical issues that Councillor Thomas mentioned at the end. In terms of the cross-party recovery panel, I mean, I of course attended the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and you hear my views that I would like it to be as flexible as possible, really, because for me it's about what works. So the idea of it being a panel was that you could meet more often, you could invite representatives to attend as and when necessary, and perhaps less often you would get together maybe as a full group and then report back your recommendations to Corporate Overview and Scrutiny, who in turn would report that into Cabinet. I don't think it was the intention that those smaller meetings of the panel would be webcast. I think it is the intention that the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where you'd report back into, would be webcast, as it would for all public meetings moving forward, until we can get back to attending them in person. So I think, within the confines of the terms of reference, I think it's a matter for you as a panel to be reasonably flexible, to work in a way that allows you to make recommendations in a timely manner. I think what my advice and my caution is, probably don't bite off more than you can chew, because you could spend probably 18 months looking at everything, but you might miss the boat in terms of recommendations. I think you've got to recognise that if you want to impact, for example, on the budget and any revised corporate plan priorities for this year, then you probably need to make those initial recommendations in readiness for September. There are, of course, other things that will take longer and maybe more medium-term recommendations which might feed into next year's MTFS, for example. But I think you need to bear in mind the timeliness of what you're doing, and therefore it might be more important that you focus on a few key priorities initially to ensure that you report back to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee that's scheduled at the beginning of September, and that in turn can make recommendations to the Cabinet that's scheduled in September.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mark from any other members at all? I haven't had anybody indicate. Still nothing? Okay, we will move on to agenda item number 7 then, please, and that is the report of the Interim Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change on the capital programme outturn for 2019-20 and Q1 update reports. Jill, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And for the benefit of the recording, Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change. So what you have in front of you here is not the usual report that comes to you on capital. As a result of the influence of COVID, we brought to you today both the capital programme outturn for 2019-20 and also the Q1 update report for 2021. So an all-encompassing capital report, because as you will appreciate, one of the impacts of COVID is likely to be on some of our schemes that are in the capital programme. So the purpose of the report today is obviously to comply with all legal requirements from SIPFA and the Prudential Code, to provide an update on the capital outturn for 2019-20, and that's shown at Appendix A. Provide an update on the capital programme for the period of 1st of April to the 30th of June, and that's Appendix B. To seek agreement from Council for approval for the revised capital programme, that's at Appendix C, and to note the projected prudential and other indicators for 2021, Appendix D. So I'll move swiftly through the report, Mr. Mayor, and then both myself and Deb are in attendance for any detailed questions. So if I start at paragraph 3.4, on the 20th of February 2019, which probably feels like a lifetime ago now, Council approved a capital programme of just over 35 million to cover the period from 2019 to 29. Just to remind Council, the capital programme is a 10-year programme, and sometimes that does confuse when you look at the total scheme cost. So just to remember that. And so this report provides an update on the outturn, as I've said, the monitoring for the first quarter, the capital strategy monitoring, and the prudential and other indicators. So in section 4, you will see the capital programme outturn position for 2019-20. And the last time you saw the capital programme was at the last council meeting, which was approved by council in February 2000. Sorry, this is about the outturn position, sorry. So the original budget was on the 20th of February 2019, and that's been further revised and approved during the year to incorporate budgets brought forward from 2018-19 and any new schemes and grant approvals. So the most recent programme for 2019-20 was approved by Council in February 2020 as part of the medium-term financial strategy, and that totaled 30 million. About 14 million met from BCBC resources and about 16 million coming from external resources. And as I say, Appendix A gives you the detail of the individual schemes. Given that the revised programme was only approved in February 2020, there's very few amendments to that outturn position, other than the following changes shown in 412, which was a very welcome 2 million as a result of a new grant scheme from the Welsh Government for the hub infrastructure, and just under $500,000 to reflect spend profiles. So that brought the revised budget to 32.5 million. The expenditure, as I've said, we expect some slippage on the capital programme, but there's quite significant slippage due to the impact of COVID, and the total expenditure as at the 31st of March 20 is 22.822 million, which means that we've got an underspend of about 9.5 million. So during the year, a number of schemes did commence, but they haven't been completed, or they've been moved wholly into this year, into 2021, which again, I suspect we will have difficulty in completing everything that we want to. So if you look at paragraphs 414, that details the net slippage into 2021 and details the schemes that make up that 9 million. So coming to the capital programme Q1 update, so if we move forward now into 2021, at 421, you'll see that This provides members with an update on the capital programme for this year since the budget was last approved by Council, and this incorporates any new schemes and grant approvals. So the revised programme is shown in Table 1. It totals just over 62 million, 40 million from our own resources and 22 million coming from external resources. And you'll see approved by Council in the first column, 56, taking into account the slippage, and the new approvals giving a revised budget of 62 million. And you'll see in Table 2 how that's likely to be resourced in 2021, and the makeup of the internal resources and external resources. And Appendix B gives you much more detail on the individual schemes that includes. From 424 onwards, there are a number of amendments to the capital programme for 2021, new amended schemes, which include the 21st Century Schools Band B, Mynydd Cynfig Primary School Mobile Classrooms. That particular decision had to be taken under emergency powers as set out in that paragraph. The installation of electric vehicle charging points, the Children's Residential Accommodation Hub, Brinkethin Depot, Bridgend Enterprise Hub, the CRC at Village Farm Industrial Estate, and the Western Valley Empty Homes pilot that went to Cabinet yesterday. A revised capital programme with all the detail of those is included at Appendix C. You'll recall that we also monitor the prudential and other indicators now in the capital programme and not in the Treasury Management report. And Appendix D details the actual indicators for 2019-20 and the estimated ones for 2021. And I'm pleased to say that that shows the Council is operating in line with approved limits. The capital strategy also requires the monitoring of non-Treasury management investments and other long-term liabilities, and those are set out in paragraphs 441 and 442. And that was all I was proposing to say on the capital programme today, Mr. Mayor. I take you to the recommendations at 9.1.
Thank you, Jill. Before I ask for a mover and a seconder, I'd like to bring in the Deputy Leader, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jill, for presenting that report. As you quite rightly say, it's been a very challenging time financially for the authority. And some projects have had to be moved forward, and there has been resulting slippage in the capital programme, and also then other projects, namely the developments at Mynydd Cynfig, that had to be dealt with under emergency powers, and to ensure the safety of the children there at Mynydd Cynfig. And then other sort of movements have been because whilst we make best endeavours in the capital programme to have as accurate figures as possible, when we actually go out to tender, then the final results mean that we have to adjust those figures accordingly. So just with those few words, I'm happy to move the report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Can I have a seconder for that report, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to agenda item 8 then, and that is a report of the Chief Legal Officer, HR and Regulatory Services.
Leader, I think
Excuse me.
wish to make a
Sorry, before we move on, do we have any questions in relation to that report?
I don't really have a question, Mr. Mayor, but if you'll allow me. It's just to make a statement, actually, in relation to Joe's report. Can I pass on my thanks as a governor of Mynydd Cynfig? It's sincere gratitude from pupils, our parents, our teachers, and our community for ensuring that the funds were made available. We had a really, really difficult year, even pre-COVID, with the state of our building. It was in considerable dire straits. We had considerable failings in the school structure. So to know that there is a resolution going forward, that's enormously satisfying to know that there is something going ahead and that we will have a resolution at last. So thank you very much to all the staff officers and to our cabinet members for approving that.
Thank you, Jane, and I'm sure you'll the schools, you've spoken well on behalf of the school there. Okay, we will move on to, unless there's any other questions, which nobody has indicated. So all in favour? I take silence as approval. Agenda item 8 then, a report for the Chief Officer Legal, HR and Regulatory Services information reporting for noting, and I'll invite Kelly in, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for the recording, I'm Kelly Watson, the Monitoring Officer and Chief Officer for Legal and Regulatory Services. I've just got a short report for members today. The purpose of the report is to inform Council of the information reports that have been published since your last meeting. As you can imagine, there's more than we usually have because there's been some significant time gone past. You'll find there at 4.1 the title, so you've got an urgent delegated decisions report, which is also attached to your papers, and in that report you'll find a number of decisions that have been made since February. I take you to the recommendations at 9 and ask you to note publication of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this report? Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Spanswick. All in favour, and I will take silence as approval. Thank you very much. No questions? Okay, we will move on to agenda item 9, and that is to receive the following questions to the Executive. And the first question is from Councillor Voisey to the Deputy Leader. Councillor Voisey, you've had your response. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor. Hello?
Yes, if you'd like to ask your supplementary question.
But first, I'd like to point out that the question was put for Council before the COVID crisis. So clearly, we've had an update from the Chief Executive on the current situation, and obviously, we do expect further deterioration in the rate of collection of council tax. So my question really relates to pre-COVID, although clearly going forward, there will be difficult situations. The collection rate of 95% is short of the council tax preset rate. Can the Deputy Leader please explain what the council is going to do to try and improve the collection rate, not from those that can't afford to pay, but those that won't pay, which I think is obviously the most critical, because there is help for those who can't pay. So I look forward to the response. Thank you.
Yes, if you'd like to come in.
Yes, am I live? Yeah, right. Thank you for the question, Councillor Voisey. And as you will see from the reply, that the numbers that we failed to get a response from, I suppose it is a failure on behalf of the council, fortunately are very, very low. If you can take into consideration, we send out over almost 65,000 bills to end up with just sort of low 20s actually resulting in a final summons, then those figures are very, very low. And we try all that we can to work with residents to work through any financial issues that they may have, and to engage with the council at the earliest possible moment. And you know, we hope that we can work through these issues with them, and get a better collection rate. The collection rate is estimated currently at 95%. That is a few points below where we thought we were going to be. I accept that, but we are still very early in the season. We've sent out 6,000 letters now to residents, as the leader mentioned earlier in his report, and we will be working with people to ensure that our collection rate is as close to that 98% as possible. But we have to recognise that some people are facing serious financial difficulty, and we want to work with them rather than to be penalising them.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. And in line with our constitution, we do allow 2 additional questions in relation to questions that have been posed. So the first person to indicate is Councillor Nicole Burnett, please. Would you like to come in, Nicole?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, obviously circumstances have changed, and I do understand Councillor Voisey's reason for asking this question, but I don't think that we can ever consider low numbers of prosecutions as being a failure on the part of BCBC, because each case is an individual, and we've got some extremely vulnerable people, and we're going to have even more in the future, which I know that Councillor Voisey recognises. But we have had some initiatives which are more positive in BCBC in gaining extra income from council tax, and I wanted to know what the impact was on removing the council tax discount from empty properties in providing extra homes as well as extra council tax income, please.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. I'm going
yes,
to bring in...
Thank you for that question. Members may recall that the revenue outturn report that was presented to Cabinet in June of this year, there was a paragraph in there regarding the increased collection of council tax as a direct result of removing this discretionary element, alongside the extra homes that came on board from developers. So that did actually generate an extra 1.5 million for the authority, and it's very pleasing that out of the 1,386 properties that are identified as being empty, we now have 866 of those properties are now occupied, providing homes for much needed people.
Thank you, Howell. I'm going to bring in Jill as well at this point, if Jill would like to add to either of those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was just to add really to the Deputy Leader to say that the answer to the question was prior to the year end, and obviously there was further collection towards the end of the year in terms of council tax. So perhaps if we could come back to you, Councillor Voisey, with the rate for the year at the end of the year.
That would be fine, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Voisey. Thank you, Councillor Burnett. I do have a second indication, and that is again to Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My fear here is that the increase in council tax not being claimed is going to rise exponentially once the UK government's furloughing scheme ends in October. If that does happen and there's an increase, does the Deputy Leader think there'd be any virtue in looking at any data modelling exercises by linking council tax records with things like credit reference bureaus, so we can further support those that need our help and collect off those that are not willing to pay?
I mean, targeted support is obviously the best support, because then it gets to the people that need it the most. So, no, I'm happy to look at that if you're kind enough to share me that information or a link to that information. Then I'll gladly undertake that. But just on the council tax collection rate, this is something that's going to affect all authorities across Wales. and you know, we are working with Welsh Government to try and minimise the financial impact on authorities. Of course, we're very grateful to the support that they've provided with us over the past few months, and we hope and pray, I suppose, that support will continue. You know, council tax collection rates is obviously going to be one of many issues that we're going to have to deal with over the coming months.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I do have two other people that have indicated to ask questions, but our constitution doesn't allow any other questions other than the two. So I am going to have to move on to the next question from Councillor Hussain to the Cabinet Member for Social Services and Early Help, please. Councillor Hussain, you've had your answer. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I have a very small supplementary for Councillor White. Firstly, I thank him for his reply. Now, workforce risk assessment tool was introduced in May 2020 here in Wales. Have we learned any lessons so far, and when are we going to see this report? Thank you.
Deputy Leader, please.
Do you want me to come in, Mr. Mayor?
Oh, sorry, Councillor White, please.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain, and thank you for your initial questions and your supplementary. And yes, you are right, the toolkit was introduced, and the toolkit was introduced as the COVID-19 workforce risk assessment, and it initially focused on the health and social care employees, and at that time in May it was with a particular emphasis on those clinically working in the clinical setting. This has more recently been revised by Welsh Government and now can be used in any workplace. Meanwhile, as a local authority and a health board region, we have been reviewing the toolkit, and we've been making and scoring matrices to develop a revised version aimed at supporting employees to return to their duties. On your initial question as well, of when do we expect the report, I can only tell you at this moment in time, as those toolkits are being progressed wider field other than the health, Councillor is saying, I will need to find out for you when the expected conclusions to that report will be made available. That I am going to answer for you right now, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. Everything okay with that, Altaf? Thank you, Councillor
Yes,
White, for your
thank
response.
you very much. Thank
and
you,
I'm sure
Mr.
we
Mayor.
look forward to the detail that was in that report.
Absolutely. Yes.
I do have two additional questions that have been identified. Can I bring in Councillor Jane Gebby first of all, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question for Councillor White. I am aware that we've done a staff survey in relation to the BAME survey. Are you fully satisfied with the staff survey responses that responded positively in terms of identifying themselves as BAME, and that all the appropriate measures have been introduced according to Welsh Government guidance?
Yes, I am, Councillor Gebby. I was surprised to see those figures reduced by HR, which I will get them to circulate, obviously, to members. But those who actually came forward, as you know, it wasn't a mandatory position to do so, but it very much a voluntary position, and they did come forward and identify them in that area. So I am pleased with the response that we had back from over 800 employees and staff members. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor White. I do have a second question from Councillor David White, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask Councillor Phil White a question. In regards to the BME report, are you confident that Cwm Taff Health Board has been using the appropriate measures to carry out the assessment, and going forward, would you encourage our other partners to carry out the same assessment? And also understand now that the assessment can be used for other groups, and would you encourage the other partners and ourselves to use it for vulnerable groups and those returning from shielding?
Thank you, Councillor David, namesake White. Yes, David. Again, a report from HR for us here at the local authority. is that because it is now more widely developed, meetings have taken place with trade unions, and the trade unions have agreed the process of moving forward regarding the toolkit, and also the process regarding employees and staff members then having to contact their line managers or HR or members of support with regards to any concerns that they have going forward following the completion of those toolkits. And as far as the Cwmtaf Health Board, I can assure you that I raised that very question last week in the Health Board meeting, and that I can assure you also that as the representative on behalf of the 3 local authorities, that Cwmtaf Morgannwg Health Board have been at the forefront, may I add, regarding to BAME and the risks attached to BAME for staff, and not only for staff, may I add, but for also residents of the Cwmtaf Morgannwg Health region as well.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Phil White. Councillor David White, can I just remind you that you did ask 2 questions there. You are entitled to ask 1 question. And thank you, Councillor Tim Thomas, for pointing that out. But I did pick it up, and thank you. I'm chairing this meeting. I'll now move on to agenda item number 10, and that is a notice of motion proposed by Councillor Richard Young, please. Councillor Richard Young, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, as the challenges created by climate change become clearer and a growing body of evidence develops our understanding, the necessity to act increases. It's incumbent upon all of us to individually and collectively respond. As a council, we're a community leader, a service provider, and an estate manager. We must work together as one council, building on current efforts and utilising existing research to assess the options and priorities available to us, which we collectively view as the most appropriate in order to respond to this motion. Mr. Mayor, our response... Richard. I have been indicated that I have a point of order in relation to this motion. So I will ask the first 2 councillors that have asked in relation to a point of order, please. Can you please make sure that they are points of order and not statements or questions? So I would like to know, in relation to the standing orders, what standing orders have been breached in relation to this then from as a point of order. So Councillor Thomas, first of all.
Mr. Mayor, I was just pointing out really, and that by pointing out that Councillor White said 2 questions, I was just simply clarifying that for a point of order. And I'm well aware that you're chairing this meeting. Thank you.
So do you have a point of order?
No, it's just...
okay, thank you very much.
Proceedings went on a bit quick, that's all. Thank you.
Right, okay. Councillor Ross Penhale-Thomas, please.
I don't have a point of order, Chair. I've just asked to speak on the motion.
All right, thank you, Ross. I'll come back to you when Richard is finished, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was saying that our response should not be made lightly, and in respect to that, it might be just as well that I point out where we are and where we wish to be. There are indeed 9 key steps to effective climate action. They form a loop on which effective climate change management is built. To be effective, we are called upon to understand the problem in the first place, to plan for change, to collaborate with other organisations, to prioritise actions, to budget for change and to implement the changes, and finally, to monitor those results. Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased to inform you that Bridgend County Borough Council is already implementing the majority of such a strategy. We have become a major driver for change, not only in Bridgend, but in Wales and the UK. Bridgend is recognised nationally as an authority that is engaged in serious projects to evidence that change is possible. As a result of the research that has been undertaken in partnership with Cardiff University, we have an understanding of where our focus areas should be. Working in partnership with the Energy Systems Catapult, which is a UK government organisation, We have a detailed plan of where our direction of travel should be through our local area energy strategy and our local energy plan, the only authority in Wales at this moment to have such a blueprint. And as part of that blueprint, Mr. Mayor, we're already collaborating with external partners in the private sector as well as governmental institutions to bring to fruition current projects that seek to significantly reduce dependence on fossil fuels, reduce carbon emissions and tackle fuel poverty for our citizens. We are investing in new ways of supplying heat and investigating different ways that we as an authority can contribute to carbon reduction. We are currently actively engaged in seeking further funding mechanisms to enable us to take this programme even further and achieve our aim of meeting the government's target of being carbon free by 2050. However, Mr. Mayor, there is more to do. Although we have made the progress that I've outlined, we need to develop a climate response strategy with a prioritised action plan. And in support of this, Mr. Mayor, at its meeting of the 30th of June, the Cabinet approved our emergency response programme. This will include a cross-party member committee to oversee the climate response programme, the creation of a dedicated officer role to lead on the coordination of all BCB services, to collaborate with the public, private and third sector partners, and to engage with residents, as well as the development of a climate emergency response strategy and the development of a climate energy citizens' assembly. Mr. Mayor, all of this will need resourcing, and we are, as an authority, committed to resourcing this programme. However, going forward, after 10 years of cuts, authorities like Bridgend will struggle in the future to meet this need. Our targets cannot be achieved within the current budget settlements set for local authorities. If the government is serious about its targets, and if local government is to play its full part, then government institutions must make sure that local authorities have the wherewithal to respond to the challenge with adequate resources and funding. Having said that, Mr. Mayor, I move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Young, and I have already had a seconder from Councillor Charles Smith. Are we all in favour?
If I could speak to my second, please, Chair.
Of course, Councillor Smith.
And I think there might be others who want to speak in favour as well. I'd like to second my colleague Councillor Young's motion, and in seconding the motion, I'd like to say that my hope is that this motion will not just be symbolic or aspirational, but it will be a real guide to actual policy on the ground. And in putting policy into practice, we are all in this together. So there's a role for Bridgend County Borough Council, there's a role for Wales Government, there's a role for UK Government. So, for example, at the local level, talking about Bridgend County Borough Council and our town and community councils, locally, I think we've discovered during COVID the real value of open spaces, public realm, and rights of way. I know constituents in my ward have suddenly discovered that they live close to the countryside and are looking at open spaces and public rights of way in a new light. And I think that sort of new enlightenment needs to be built into our LDP. And I know that our planning officers are very open to that suggestion. On the Wales Government level, one thing I would like to see is a more long-term approach to active travel. I might be wrong, but as I understand it at the moment, funding for active travel schemes tends to be annual, and there tends to be a cut-off point, and there tends to be deadlines when proposals have to be sent in. And if that's the case, I think it acts against long-term planning. What we need in Bridgend to aim for is a complete alternative transport system which is active and sustainable. And at the moment we're doing that piecemeal. So we've got lots of unconnected individual schemes and we need more connectivity. And at UK government level, one scheme I would like to see brought forward is to reverse the disastrous decision by Mr Grayling to cancel electrification of the South Wales main line. It's an anachronism. If we believe that there's a climate change, it's an anachronism to have diesel trains running through our county. It's intolerable, it's inexcusable, and that scheme for electrification should be revived immediately. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'm going to bring back in Councillor Ross Penhale-Thomas now, please.
Yeah, many thanks, Chair. I welcome the return of the motion to Council. Very warmly welcome the words of the Cabinet member as well, Richard Young. I think it's really important to recognise that BCBC is one of the largest, if not the largest, organisations in the county in terms of our footprint, the number of people we employ. We can obviously and naturally expect residents, businesses and other stakeholders to look to us for best practice, leadership and inspiration. Aside from flooding, we can also expect hotter, drier summers, but generally far more extreme weather events, bringing with it a huge impact on the environment, biodiversity and on us as citizens and the way that we live our lives. And as the Chief Executive referred to in his earlier report, we find ourselves, I think, at a crossroads where the time for talking is over and the time for doing is now paramount. And through the twists and turns of the very real impact of COVID-19, we have a unique opportunity here to stop, take stock and reflect on previous ways of working, which we can either adapt or scrap entirely in order to support, I think, positive changes moving forward that directly impact our efforts to reduce carbon footprint. The Chief Executive referred to a green recovery. That's a pathway for rebuilding better. That's something I wholeheartedly support. There are very clear, inextricable links here with the climate emergency. The motion recognises in its wording that a climate emergency exists, and so I'm proposing an amendment that we formally declare a climate emergency as a fundamental part of passing this motion today. In doing so, we join colleagues in Caerphilly, Cardiff, Carmarthenshire, Denbighshire, Gwynedd, Monmouthshire, Pembrokeshire, Swansea, Torfaen, the Vale of Glamorgan, Wrexham and Welsh Government itself in recognising the very seriousness of this situation, as well as calling fundamentally for support from key partners such as Welsh Government. We demonstrate, I think, in declaring that climate emergency very loud and clear that we are a leader in new ways of thinking. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ross. I'm going to bring in Councillor Nicole Burnett, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I just want to support the motion as a member of planning. I'm just read the Welsh Government's Building Better Places document, which outlines the vision for planning and how it will help us recover post-COVID, and tackling climate is just as important as tackling communities and making us strong. So yes, I think this is very positive. I think Bridgend should be leading the way, and I welcome this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. We do have another speaker, so I'm going to just seek advice from Kelly. Do we want to listen to the third speaker and then decide what happens in relation to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The process, if there's an amendment, and I can see it has been seconded by Councillor Clark, is Council as a whole now need to decide whether that amendment is on the table. So it's been moved and seconded. There needs to be a decision whether all is in favour of the amendment or whether there's disagreement to the amendment.
Okay.
Once we know then, well, obviously it's Councillor Young's motion, so really I know he wants to speak. He may have a view on whether he wants to accept the amendment or not.
Okay, I've just notified as well. But...
Mr Mayor, can I respond now before you go to that?
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to check whether we wanted to listen to the last speaker before to speak on this, because obviously if we amend it, I'm just wondering about what Councillor Altaf Hussain has to say, whether that's in relation to the original motion, which he's by the time that he indicated it's going to be, or whether we take the amendment first of all. But then Councillor Patel has also asked a question in relation to the amendment as well.
Yes, we deal with the amendment first, because the amendment either stands and the final decision is on the amended motion, or that falls and then the final decision is on the original motion.
Okay, so I'll bring Councillor Young in first then, please.
Okay, thank you. The reason why just to clarify the situation, I thank everybody for their supportive comments, but the reason why there wasn't a passage in the motion declaring a climate emergency is basically because the Welsh Government have already done that, and I didn't see the need to repeat that, but this was in response to that climate emergency motion that came from Welsh Government to demonstrate that we are taking practical measures to comply with that. However, there is an amendment from Councillor Ross Penhill-Thomas, which I would not be minded to oppose, to be perfectly honest with you, Mr. Mayor, and if my seconder is in agreement with that, I'd be quite prepared to accept the amendment.
Okay, well, before we move on to that, I'll bring in Councillor Patel and then Councillor Alex Williams after that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted a point of clarification around the amended wording. I think Councillor Alex Williams has also asked the same question as me in the comment box. I understand that Councillor Penhill-Thomas amended, but he didn't state what the actual wording was. I just wanted to clarify that, please.
Okay, then I will bring back in Councillor Ross Penhill-Thomas on asking for the wording of his amendment, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very simple in the preamble, perhaps the opening sentence, Bridgend County Borough Council declares a climate emergency. Full stop.
Okay. So, Councillor Richard Young, are you prepared to accept the amendment?
As I said previously, as long as my second is prepared to accept them, and I have no compunction in accepting it. I think it doesn't change our direction of travel in any shape or form, and but if council is happier with that, and I'm quite prepared to accept it.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I'm going to bring in Councillor Charles Smith as the seconder, whether he wants to respond on that.
As the seconder, I've got no problem with the amendment. Some people will say it's just semantics anyway, but for the sake of clarity, yes, let's go with it.
Okay, so I've had a mover and a seconder for the amendment, and the original mover and seconder have accepted that. Are we all in favour of that amendment, or do you require a vote on the matter? I will take silence as all in favour. And we have silence. Okay, so we have the amendment. So we've had a mover and seconder for that motion. Are we all in favour of that second motion, or the amended motion, I should say? Again, silence will be taken as approval. Thank you, Councillor David. I do have, obviously, Councillor Altaf Hussain who wished to speak. Do you still wish to speak, Councillor Hussain?
Yes, sir. It is just a word about I want to say. I support it wholeheartedly, and I look forward that I'll be able to walk and cycle from Panaway to rest of the county, which have been doing over the last 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. So that motion has passed. Thank you very much. We move on to item 11, urgent items, and there are no urgent items in my folder for today. So I'd just like to thank you all very much for your attendance and your patience. And obviously this is a different way of working for all of us, but I'm sure we'll be getting a lot more used to this in the future. So thank you very much for your attendance, and I close this meeting at 16:48.